On June 12, 2009, a man arrived in the town of Sligo Island by bus from Derry. The weather was mild and overcast, typical of early summer on the northwestern coast. He stepped off the vehicle with a steady, unhurried pace, carrying a small suitcase and a purple plastic bag. No one paid him any particular attention. His face was unremarkable. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and a frame that was still upright. He was neatly dressed, a dark jacket, collared shirt, and polished leather shoes. Nothing seemed suspicious. Nothing stood out. Yet 10 days later, the man would become a national mystery. He walked to the Sligo City Hotel and booked a room for several nights. When filling out the registration form, he wrote his name as Peter Bergman. He listed his address as Enstetten, Austria. The receptionist didn't press for details. A passport or official ID wasn't required at a time for guests from within the European Union. He was given a room on the third floor, number 705. Over the following days, the man followed an almost uniform routine, leaving the hotel in the morning carrying a plastic bag that looked heavy, wandering through the town, and returning in the afternoon with the same bag now visibly empty. He repeated this pattern for 3 straight days. No one knows what he was disposing of or where. City CCTV footage was thoroughly examined by authorities, yet there wasn't a single frame showing him throwing anything away. It was as if he instinctively knew where every blind spot in the camera network was, or knew precisely how to avoid surveillance angles. He appeared at one end of a street and disappeared at the other, again and again. Police concluded that during these hours he systematically discarded most of his personal belongings, but not a single item was ever recovered. On the 4th day, he visited the local post office. He bought a few stamps and 2 postcards, along with a large envelope. Who he wrote to remains unknown. No records of his mailing exist. Even the name and address used during the transaction led nowhere. He appeared to be preparing something, yet no witness saw him actually send a letter. The items were not found in his hotel room. Either he mailed them to an untraceable location, or he disposed of them like everything else. What is clear is this: he was methodically erasing himself. He was also seen visiting a dental clinic and inquired about a consultation. But when the staff asked for medical data, he deflected and quickly left. The clinic reported he appeared physically healthy, but reserved and unwilling to engage in conversation. He had no strong accent. Many believed he sounded like a native German speaker, yet his pronunciation had been soft, likely by years of mobility, a neutral tone possibly the result of having lived in many countries. On June 16, 2009, around 6:30 in the morning, the man's body was found by a local out for a walk along Ross's Point Beach, roughly 10 kilometers from the town center. The body was lying in the sand, partially submerged by the tide. He wore a dark suit, black trousers, and a purple shirt. In his inner pocket, a small amount of cash and multiple currencies was found, but no wallet, no ID, and no clothing labels. Even the brand tags on his shirt, pants, and jacket had been carefully cut off. Not a single item of his clothing could be traced to a manufacturer. He wasn't wearing dentures, although forensics confirmed he clearly needed them, a deliberate choice. Forensic examination concluded he died by drowning. There were no signs of violence. No alcohol, narcotics, or poison were found in his system. But the autopsy report revealed something more disturbing. The man was suffering from advanced prostate cancer. The cancer had metastasized to his bones and lungs. He also had heart disease and a chronic spinal condition. In such a condition, he should have required regular medical care, but no medications were found, no medical records, no evidence he had visited any hospitals in Ireland. His hotel room was examined meticulously. No personal belongings were found, except a spare set of clothes also stripped of all labels. No phone, no razor, no photographs, documents, or even tourist brochures. This man had stayed 3 full nights and successfully removed nearly every trace of who he was. His fingerprints were not in any European criminal database. No missing persons report matched his face or body. The address he provided in Austria did not exist. The name he used did not match any person in the civil registries of Austria, Germany, or any other European country. He had appeared from nothing, stayed briefly, and vanished. Police and Interpol released a digital sketch of the man's face internationally. No credible responses came in. No family claimed him. No old friend reached out. Even the media, which briefly spotlighted the case, eventually had to concede. Peter Bergman was likely a fabricated name, belonging to a man who had successfully erased himself from the world. He became a modern symbol of an ancient question. Is it still possible to disappear entirely from today's global system? A more disturbing question soon followed, not who he was, but how it was even possible for someone to disappear so completely in an age where nearly every human movement is recorded and archived. He knew camera routes. He knew how to mask body language. He knew how to avoid standard tracking methods. He even knew that purple plastic bags were less likely to be inspected than suitcases. There was intelligence and precision behind all of his actions. Was he just a dying man seeking solitude, or was he escaping from something larger, something darker, something that would never appear in an official report? That was just the beginning. 3 weeks after the body was found, the case had been classified as death by natural causes under unusual circumstances. But to Senior Detective Kevin Gilmartin, that decision felt premature. He had spent decades dealing with suicides, overdoses, and unexplained deaths. But there was something about this man that unsettled him on a personal level. He kept a printed still from the CCTV footage. Peter Bergman standing in the hotel lobby, holding that purple bag. His expression was flat, but there was an intensity that defied description, as if he knew this would be the last image of him to exist on Earth. Gilmartin retraced the man's movements frame by frame. He spent nights in the surveillance room, replaying every clip from stores, streets, and bus stops. Each morning, for 3 days straight, Bergman left the hotel at 8:48 a.m., always carrying a full-looking plastic bag. He walked toward the harbor or into parks at the city's edge, then returned around 12:30 p.m. with the same bag now visibly empty. Not once was he recorded disposing of anything. No footage showed him using trash bins. No records indicated he left items at storage lockers, other hotels, or bus stations. It was as if he disposed of the contents in locations beyond the reach of surveillance. After reviewing the city's blind spots, Gilmartin noticed a series of narrow alleys between older buildings as he sat walking each alley, imagining the viewpoint of someone intent on disappearing. Brick walls, high windows, rusty bins, narrow crevices, plenty of space to slip an envelope, a device, or documents, but nothing was ever found. He questioned street cleaners and waste workers. One worker, Nolan, vaguely recalled finding torn clothing labels and pieces of plastic near the back entrance of an old warehouse, but it had been tossed into a landfill container later that day. The trail had gone cold. In a digital world, Peter Bergman had used analog methods. No online purchases. He spoke only when necessary. Everything he carried was fizzy land. He moved like a man from an older world, which raised an even bigger question. Interpol replied with facial recognition results of 612 possible matches, only to show high resemblance. Both were alive. One was a retired professor from Leipzig, who had never been to Ireland in his life. The resemblance was purely coincidental, a reflection of Central European facial architecture. No matching identity emerged from 30 countries. Peter Bergman had not merely faked his identity. He had escaped the entire global face recognition network, a feat typically only achieved by elite professionals. From the medical side, the autopsy raised further questions. His prostate cancer had spread to the bones, and the pain should have been immense. Yet no painkillers or sedatives were found. He lived with conditions most would find unbearable, yet he walked normally, stood tall, and showed no signs of physical distress in any footage. Some forensic doctors found this extraordinary. Patients in such condition usually need assistance, but Bergman appeared fully capable. In medicine, there is a term, pain suppression via cortical override, a rare biological phenomenon where individuals suppress pain through extreme mental training. It's been studied among elite soldiers and Cold War intelligence agents, particularly in East Germany, Soviet networks, and CIA black programs. Was Peter Bergman part of that generation? Possibly, but again, there was no direct evidence, only patterns. Theories began to circulate among European investigative journalists. One came from Armin Blair, a former intelligence historian in Vienna. He claimed Bergman's disappearance matched what was known in classified circles as the Phoenix Protocol, a final exit procedure for former state agents with no protection or relevance. The protocol involved assuming a false identity, traveling to a neutral country, destroying all personal traces, and dying in a location unconnected to their past. But the document has never been publicly verified. Blair's theory is dismissed by many, yet he posed one unsettling question. If Peter Bergman was a nobody, why go to such trouble to erase everything? One thing is certain, Bergman had deep knowledge of how modern systems operate. He knew that identity is built from small things: passports, bank cards, phones, clothing labels, medical prescriptions. Remove them all, and the system cannot track you. But knowledge like this is not common. This was not a random old man choosing to die. This was someone who designed his disappearance with near clinical precision. People began to wonder, could he have come from a different time? Not literally, like a science fiction trope, but socially. Psychologically, Dr. Elizabeth Kroll of the University of Tübingen proposed that Bergman might have been a person from the 1970s or earlier who had spent decades off the grid, emerging only to complete something unresolved. Perhaps not a time traveler in the physical sense, but one in culture and structure. But if that were true, the next question was, why now? What did he carry? Or more precisely, what did he leave behind? That was what kept Gilmartin awake at night. He believed the man had come not just to die, but to leave something he had hidden in this small town. But if such a message existed, it had been buried very, very deep. Gilmartin kept all the case notes in a thick black folder. Inside were dozens of documents: the autopsy report, facial recognition matches, phone logs, and city CCTV maps. But there was one item he returned to the most: A still image from the hotel camera, showing Peter Bergman standing in the lobby with a purple plastic bag in his left hand. Gilmartin often felt as though the man was looking back at him, not just a two-dimensional image, but something with awareness, as if Bergman knew precisely what he was doing and to whom his trail would leave a mystery. Meanwhile, a surveillance architecture expert from University College Dublin, Dr. Neil Ferron, contacted Gilmartin after reading a brief mention of the case in a police journal. He expressed interest in Bergman's movement pattern. Using archived city data, he reconstructed a 3D simulation of CCTV system in 2009 proved something astonishing. Only someone with deep knowledge of city design and surveillance Flo could have walked the exact paths Peter Bergman did without ever being recorded disposing of a single item. The routes weren't random, they were optimized. This wasn't just instinct, it was strategy. Ferron explained that this pattern matched what intelligence circles once called the shadow loop, a walking route that avoids all visual senses in urban zones. These routes were taught only to specific agents. In a European context, they were used by Cold War era networks for cross-border operations. Could Bergman have been part of that world? The deeper Gilmartin went, the more he realized they weren't just investigating a man, but reopening a forgotten chapter of history. In the past, hundreds of individuals lived with dual intrusion. They survived between forged documents, loose borders, and information wars. But by 2009, the world had changed. Almost everyone was traceable. How could an old man remain so invisible? One unusual clue came from the burial report. Peter Bergman's body was buried at Sligo Cemetery with no family, no ceremony, just a small stone marked unnamed man. Found 2009 by the grave. An old man named Declan Roach gave an account never recorded in official files. He claimed that on the night before the burial, he saw two men standing silently by the outer cemetery fence. They brought no flowers, they said nothing, just stood and watched the freshly dug grave. When Declan approached, they walked away without a word. This was never confirmed. The cemetery's security camera had failed that night due to heavy rain. No trace was left behind. Still, the story haunted Gil. He didn't know whether the two men had known Bergman or were simply observing the burial. But one thing was certain. Even in death, Peter Bergman drew attention from the shadows. Months later, a technical report from Germany arrived. A forensic analyst in Berlin named Lucas Engelhardt, intrigued by the case due to the Austrian elite, conducted an unusual experiment. He tested name-forging methods across German and Austrian databases and found something peculiar. The name Peter Bergman had strange characteristics. It was common enough not to attract attention, yet rare enough to be difficult to verify without documents. It appeared in specific regions only, and its frequency dropped sharply after night. Engelhardt called it a vanishing name, one historically used by identity forging networks in Eastern Austria during the late Cold War. This wasn't proof, but it was a crack of light in a sealed room. He began digging through declassified Austrian intelligence archives. Among tens of thousands of pages, one file stood out. It was titled Shatino Gashado Walker. The document described the existence of an independent operator named B, active between 1973 and 1985, who helped defectors and fugitives escape East Germany into neutral countries. The operation was unaffiliated with any nation. The man's real name was unknown, but on 2 occasions, he was reported using the alias Peter Bergman. Could it be the same man? The age matched, the timing aligned, but there were no photos, no biometrics, only activity reports. Yet one testimony described a man who always wore clothing without labels and carried only disposable documents, a detail nearly identical to the Sligo case. Gilmartin tried to track down former agents involved in operations from that era, but many were dead or living in deep silence. One name that surfaced was Friedrich Möller, a former communications analyst for West Germany's BND intelligence agency. After several refusals, Gilmartin finally secured an informal interview through intermediaries. In a brief meeting in Hamburg, Möller said only one thing. If that man was indeed Peter Bergman from the Shatino files, then he wasn't just disappearing. He was protecting something, maybe someone, and he knew his time was nearly up. Gilmartin said nothing. There was a weight to those words. What did Möller mean? Protecting who? Was the man carrying information or a secret? The investigation brought no answers, only deeper questions. But in the midst of all the riddles, a pattern began to emerge. Every action Peter Bergman took was not just about erasing identity. It was a ritual of severance, a deliberate cutting of all ties to the world. He didn't want to be remembered, but more than that, he didn't want to be found, and that is what made him unforgettable. Gilmartin returned to Sligo after 8 months of investigation that had taken him across Europe. He stood on the coast of Ross's Point, where Peter Bergman's body had been found, wearing a thick coat swayed by sea winds. The weather was like the day the body was discovered, gray skies, waves crashing on the rocks, and the sting of salt in the air. Though years had passed, the place felt frozen in time. Nothing had changed, like a riddle still unanswered, waiting to be understood not by logic but by persistence. He looked out across the shoreline, imagining the old man's final steps. According to the medical report, Bergman's body showed no signs of accident or violence, but the position of the body line on its side, one hand on his chest, reminded Gilmartin of something omitted in official files. The expression on his face, privately noted by the forensic examiner, was not one of pain. It was serenity, as if he knew this was the end and accepted it. One detail often overlooked by media and investigators was that Peter Bergman carried a torn and rearranged sheet of paper from the Sligo Hotel. It contained a roadmap and hand notes in strange symbols not Latin, Cyrillic, or Arab. A semiotics expert from the University of Tartu identified them as a variant of 1970s Austrian military shorthand. The notes remain undiscovered. But in the corner of the page, one phrase stayed in Gilmartin's mind: "No place remains untouched." That sentence felt like the manifesto of the man's entire journey, that wherever he went, he brought change, or perhaps scars, as if his presence, seemingly insignificant, left an impact deeper than seen. A few weeks after returning to Ireland, Gilmartin received an email from an elderly woman in Slovenia, claiming she had met a man matching Bergman's description in 1994 in Ljubljana. She attached an old, blurry photograph showing a man in a long coat standing at a bus stop. His expression was nearly identical to Bergman's in the hotel lobby. There was little to verify in the photo except one detail. He stood before a large mural that read, "Zes Begi, Ascensos Denayo, time runs, but shadows remain." Gilmartin grew more convinced this man was not just a fugitive, nor a cancer patient, choosing silence over treatment. He felt like a remnant of another world, a world that no longer exists. A world where agents lived in the dark, among borders now erased. A world where information was more valuable than life, and disappearance was the highest form of freedom. He dug deeper into the Shadow Walker files and found that many of BS operations were not for the gain of any nation, but to rescue individuals, activists, scientists, even defectors betrayed by their own side. He wasn't a spy. He was a survivor of a system he once helped operate, and perhaps in the end, he became its last victim. Peter Bergman, if that was his name, had spent his life hiding his trail, but ironically, in death, he became the brightest riddle. Every action, removing clothing labels, destroying paper scraps, avoiding cameras, was an effort to send a message that a trace is not a weakness, but a message waiting to be read by the right eyes. When Gilmartin finally closed the case file, he did not feel the investigation had failed. On the contrary, he believed what had been uncovered went far beyond identity. It was a mirror of how we trace, document, and try to understand those who do not wish to be understood. Peter Bergman became a symbol for those who choose silence as resistance and disappearance, not out of fear, but out of defiance. 2 years after the case was officially closed, Gilmartin received a package with no sender. Inside was a single item, a VH. The label was handwritten in capital letters, Fur PB-1986. He almost threw it away, thinking it was just a prank from someone who had read the viral story about Bergman. But something about the German spelling on the label made him pause. He found an old VHS player in the archive office, inserted the tape and watched it with a pounding heart. The image was grainy, a white-walled room, empty, no sound. The camera was fixed. Then, a man stepped into frame, standing calmly, looking directly at the lens. He was younger than the Bergman seen in Sligo, perhaps in his 40s, but the face was nearly identical, the same quiet expression. He wore a dark formal suit, no insignia or pins. After a few seconds of silence, he spoke German. His accent was clean, neutral, without any regional markings. "If you're watching this, then something has failed. My name is not important. Nothing is permanent, but some secrets must not be buried forever." Gilmartin digitized the tape and sent it to a professional translator. The monologue was strange, like a final message to a world that never knew him. The man in the video spoke of an invisible network crossing Europe, of moral compromise, of decisions that shaped history but were never recorded. He named no places, people, or dates, but one sentence bound everything together. "We worked so that the world wouldn't shatter into fragments smaller than the truth." An intelligence history expert from Amsterdam, Dr. Elise van Goor, concluded that the man was likely involved in back-channel operation between East and West during the mid-1980s, operations that were unofficial, off the books, and often officially denied. She mentioned a rare term, Zittriger, time carriers, individuals who transported information across events, linking past and future through the gaps in official history. Gilmartin watched the tape dozens of times. Every movement, intonation, even the man's breathing felt calculated, as if the video wasn't meant for anyone in his own time but prepared for someone in the future. Perhaps not to explain, but to affirm that the trace was deliberate. The deeper he went, the less convinced he was that this was a missing person or unexplained death case. This wasn't just the end of one man, but a quiet confession that a parallel current of history existed alongside the official one, and Peter Bergman, or whoever he truly was, had been its keeper. Keeper of what? No one knew, but he knew too much, and he chose silence not out of fear but As an act of final control, Gilmartin never discovered who sent the tape. No fingerprints, no CCTV footage, He even suspected the tape may have been stored somewhere for years waiting for the right moment to emerge. Or perhaps someone kept it hidden until they knew no one else was chasing him. Whatever the truth, the tape changed everything. From a mystery of identity, the case transformed into an existential puzzle. If the man in the tape was truly Bergman, then his entire life had been part of an unspoken project, and his death on that beach was not an escape but a ritual, the conclusion of a final. Come on, subscribe for videos about other interesting world facts.